No one was supposed to make it through the healer exclusion ring. It was the sort of border you whispered about in academies, a place students studied for the sake of theory but never expected to see with their own eyes. The ring was a graveyard carved by physics itself, wrapped in gravity fractures, quantum traps, and sentry AIs that had never once failed in the thousands of years they had been running. It was not a wall of stone or metal, it was an idea made real, the ultimate dead end. And then the alert arrived. The first to see it was a junior technician sitting alone in boundary array Theta 9. He blinked at the incoming data, checked the timestamp, and then checked it again. The report was clean, which made it worse. Nothing in that sector was supposed to move, yet there it was, a vessel inside the forbidden zone. He tried to laugh it off as a ghost signal, but the longer he stared the less room there was for jokes. He felt the muscles in his throat tighten as he pushed the alert through higher channels. By the time the Council's analysts confirmed the breach, the vessel had already passed 3 checkpoints that should not have allowed passage. It did not trigger heat sensors, it did not leave a wake of ionized dust, and it carried no identifying signature. From the records, it was simply black. Not painted black, not disguised, but a void in the shape of a ship, a silhouette of nothingness that swallowed every signal aimed at it. Commander Marcus Hale stood in the observatory chamber above Theta 9, watching the incident log replay on layered holograms. He did not move, did not speak, and that silence unsettled the aides around him more than shouting ever could. Hale was known for his calm, a man who had built his career on logic colder than space itself. But even he could not hide the slight tremor that passed through his fingers as he expanded the playback. The ship had not requested entry. It had not responded to queries. Instead, it transmitted a pulse. At first the analysts thought it was interference, noise bleeding across systems, but then one of the Council cryptographers broke it down. It was math. Not a map, not coordinates, not even language, just a sequence of proofs that twisted into each other like a riddle. Proofs no archive held. Proofs born from somewhere else. The air in the chamber had gone heavy. Someone muttered that maybe it was a test, a prank from one of the Directorate's more eccentric factions, but Hale cut the voice off with a glance. His eyes, pale and sharp under the room's dim glow, held no panic. Only calculation. "This isn't an accident," he said at last, his voice low, each word measured like a verdict. "And it isn't a drill. Someone wants to be noticed." A silence followed, broken only by the faint hum of the observatory systems. The replay looped again and again, showing the vessel slip through the exclusion belt as if it were nothing but water. Then came the part that froze the chamber. The trajectory. The entry vector tracked back with sickening clarity, not to any of the Directorate's rivals or rogue fleets, but to a blue planet marked Tier 3. A planet long written off as unstable, volatile, and unworthy of interference. Earth. Hale stared at the projection as the counselors exchanged uneasy glances. For centuries, humanity had been catalogued as erratic, emotional, and fragile. Too unpredictable to uplift, too disorganized to erase. They were watched from afar and dismissed as irrelevant. But nothing about this ship was irrelevant. The pulse replayed one last time, the mathematical riddles resolving into a closing sequence. It was simple, stripped of any decoration, impossible to misinterpret once the cryptographers finished their work. *We see you now. Protocol begins*. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The chamber already knew this was no border breach. It was the start of something larger. And when Marcus Hale keyed in his final request to Fleet Command, his voice carried not urgency, but inevitability. Authorization request. Interception directive, black signal, Tier Omega. A directive that had not been used in 12,000 years. A directive that had once marked the fall of empires. The words hung in the observatory like a weight. Tier Omega. The aides shifted uncomfortably, some glancing at each other as if searching for reassurance that did not come. It was one thing to issue a fleet movement, another to invoke a signal last spoken during the collapse of civilizations. General Adrian Cross was the first to arrive in person. He stepped into the chamber with the easy stride of a man who had never been late in his life. His reputation preceded him, a commander who had overseen 3 pacification campaigns without once resorting to orbital cleansing. Cross was efficient, ruthless when required, and allergic to waste. He read the transcript in silence, his jaw tightening only slightly as his eyes moved down the lines. "This is not infiltration," he said finally, his tone sharp enough to slice through the tension. "It's an invitation." No one laughed, though a few wanted to. Cross was not a man who joked. The idea of humanity extending an invitation carried the sting of absurdity, yet the proof on the screens was undeniable. The vessel had not come cloaked in aggression, nor had it begged for peace. It had arrived, declared itself, and then disappeared. That absence was almost worse than an attack. "Origin confirmed?" Cross asked, though he already knew the answer. Solar system vector, Hale replied. His voice gave away nothing. The chamber fell quiet again. For generations, the Council had regarded humanity as a statistical curiosity, a volatile species good for study but not for contact. They were resource-rich, biologically redundant, and possessed a knack for surviving disasters of their own making. But strategically? They had been written off as noise. To see them here, leaping from noise to paradox, felt like waking to find smoke in a locked room. Counselor Celine Ward leaned forward, her face lit by the holographic glow. She had always been the sharpest skeptic among them, famous for reminding her colleagues that arrogance was often the first step toward collapse. "Let us not fool ourselves," she said calmly. "The humans did not stumble into this. They wanted us to see them. That is a declaration in every way but words." Dr. Lydia Monroe, seated toward the back, finally raised her voice. She was a theorist, not a soldier, her specialty the mathematics of nonlinear thought. Her presence at high-level briefings was often treated as academic garnish, but this time her voice cut clean. "The ship did not breach our defenses," she said. "It avoided them. You see it as an accident because you assume our locks are walls. To them, they were shapes to walk around." The sentence landed heavier than expected. One of the younger aides, pale and visibly unnerved, muttered, "That's impossible." Monroe almost smiled, though it was thin and humorless. "So is crossing the exclusion ring. Yet here we are." Cross exhaled slowly, folding his arms. "Then we have two problems. First, a Tier 3 world just leapt 4 levels in capability without explanation. Second, they've chosen to announce it with math, not diplomacy." "Why math?" Ward asked, her voice curious rather than defensive. "Because math is universal," Monroe replied. "And because it makes us work for the answer. They're telling us they don't care if we understand their language, as long as we recognize the intelligence behind it. It's not communication. It's proof of life." For a moment, no one moved. The thought was too big, too strange, to hold comfortably. A species the Directorate had dismissed as erratic had stepped forward not with weapons, not with pleas, but with an equation that bent the laws of defense systems designed to be unbendable. Hale broke the silence. His voice was steady, but every word carried the weight of a man who already knew the argument was lost. "You all understand what this means. They did not come to negotiate. They came to change the terms of what negotiation even looks like." The hologram looped again, the black silhouette gliding through the ring without resistance. Cross rubbed his temple with 2 fingers. "We cannot assume intent. It may be a show of strength. It may be a warning. Or, Ward said, it may be both." At that, a sharp flicker of unease spread across the chamber. The vessel had left them no demands, no promises, only a single closing phrase decoded from the pulse. A phrase that was now burned into the minds of every person in the room. "We see you now. Protocol begins, *." Nobody asked what the protocol was. That was the part that made it terrifying. And somewhere beneath the fear and confusion, there was something else. A thin, almost imperceptible thread of realization threading through the chamber like static. For the first time in living memory, it was not the Directorate that had chosen when contact began. It was humanity. The session chamber never liked silence, yet now it was full of it. Not the comfortable pause of reflection, but the thick, airless kind that pressed against the skin. Every counselor present could feel it, though none wanted to name the truth out loud. It was Counselor Dorian Pike who finally broke the stillness. Pike was a man of ceremony, always draped in silver robes that made him look like he had stepped out of an antique portrait. He had spent decades polishing words until they shone, but this time his voice was blunt. "We cannot let this pass as if it were a curiosity. If humanity has achieved this, whatever it is, then the Directorate must decide if they are anomaly or threat." His words triggered the first real spark of energy in the room. Several aides whispered at once, their voices overlapping, until Celine Ward cut across them with a sharp motion of her hand. "Threat is too easy a word," she said. "It satisfies fear without explaining it. What we saw was not aggression. It was exposure. They showed us what they could do, then left. If they wanted destruction, there would be wreckage at the exclusion belt." General Cross gave her a thin smile, the kind that always came before one of his cold retorts. "Or they are patient predators. A cat does not eat the first bird it catches, it toys with it until the flock scatters." Ward's expression did not shift. "And perhaps the cat in your story is staring at us, wondering why we think we are the flock." It was the sort of dry exchange that usually broke the tension, but this time no one chuckled. The words simply landed and stayed there, sharp-edged, waiting for someone to dull them. Dr. Lydia Monroe, still seated in the rear, adjusted the hollow projection with a flick of her fingers. The black vessel rotated in the air between them, a void shape glimmering against starlight. "You should notice what is missing," she said. No markings. No insignia. Not even the hint of Alliance colors. It is not meant to represent humanity. It is meant to erase the question of representation. That is what makes it dangerous. It is not just a ship. It is a statement. Pike frowned. And what statement is that? That humanity is no longer where we think they are, Monroe replied. That our categories, our neat boxes of classification, do not hold them. They arrive not with weapons, but with mathematics. Proof, not threat. That tells us their game is not ours. Cross shifted in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. And what if that's exactly what they want us to believe? An enemy that hides behind riddles, that forces us to chase meaning instead of strategy, can be just as lethal as one with guns at our throats. Perhaps, Hale said finally, breaking his own long silence. His voice was quiet but carried like a drumbeat. But dismissing the implications will not make them vanish. We've classified them for centuries as volatile, emotional, incapable of stability. Yet the evidence stands in front of us. They crossed the exclusion ring. They made our defenses irrelevant. And they left us not a challenge, but a phrase we do not understand. Celine Ward leaned back, exhaling through her nose. Then perhaps it is time we give their mystery a name. If we cannot explain the vessel, we can at least begin by labeling it. The suggestion seemed to lighten the chamber, if only slightly. Naming something felt like control. Monroe spoke first. Call it what it is. A void. A ship that absorbs everything we throw at it. A black vessel. The words settled into the air with eerie finality. It was simple, not poetic, yet everyone in the chamber felt the gravity of it. Pike adjusted his robes, nodding once. Then let the record show. Black vessel, designation unknown. Origin, Sol system. Intent, unconfirmed. Classification, paradox. The aides scrambled to transcribe the decree, though their hands shook as they worked. Hale did not look away from the hologram. The shape of the vessel lingered in the air, swallowing light. Names will not save us, he said quietly. What matters is whether they are showing us a door, or a weapon. No one answered him. Not because they lacked the words, but because every mind in the chamber knew he was right. The question was too large, too heavy, to dismiss with rhetoric. The projection shimmered one last time, then dissolved into darkness. The session adjourned without ceremony, each official leaving in silence, carrying the same thought back into their private halls. Humanity was not supposed to be here. Humanity was not supposed to matter. And yet, against every prediction, against every law of distance and power, the black vessel had arrived. The council chamber emptied, but the story did not stay confined to its walls. Nothing that unsettling ever did. By the time the last official left, secured channels were already alive with speculation, coded updates, and half-truths wrapped in bureaucratic language. The Directorate had always prided itself on controlling narrative, yet control was slipping. Information had a way of finding cracks, and this particular event spread like smoke seeping through sealed doors. At Fleet Command on Cartho's Spire, a young officer named Brennerfield scrolled through the incoming traffic with disbelief carved across his face. He had been trained to sift propaganda from substance, but the word breach repeated too often in too many encrypted packets to dismiss. Every report used the same language, a phrase so stark it hardly seemed real. Exclusion ring compromised. He leaned back in his chair, muttering, "That's not supposed to be possible." His colleague, a woman with hair cropped short and an expression sharpened by too many night shifts, smirked without humor. "Neither is free coffee in this place, but you still check the dispenser every morning." Field shot her a look. "You're making jokes? You saw the classification tag. Tier Omega." That earned him silence. Even among hardened officers, that phrase carried history like a wound. Tier Omega had been the Directorate's last resort during the fall of the Ashari dynasties, when whole sectors collapsed into ruin. It was not a code anyone threw around lightly. "Fine," his colleague said at last, her voice dropping low. "Then it means either humanity just broke every law of physics we know, or someone at the top wants us to believe they did. Which one scares you more?" Field didn't answer, because he honestly couldn't decide. Across the city towers of Cartho's Prime, in the upper levels of the Directorate's intelligence annex, the same conversation played out at higher stakes. Advisors in crisp uniforms pored over fragments of the transmission, replaying the pulse until the sound became an ache in their ears. Every analyst hated it, not because they failed to decode it, but because the math itself carried a kind of mockery. A cascade of proofs that shouldn't exist, yet somehow did, bending neatly around paradox traps like they were minor inconveniences. One of the senior analysts finally pushed back from her desk. "They didn't come to challenge us," she said, rubbing her eyes. "They came to tell us our defenses don't matter. That's worse than a weapon. That's a conversation starter." Her superior raised an eyebrow. You think this is diplomacy? No, she said flatly. It's stagecraft. They walked into our theater, stood under our spotlight, and reminded us that we don't control the stage anymore. On the streets below, ordinary citizens heard whispers. None of the details were public yet, but the unease was noticeable in the way conversations shifted in cafes, the way traders hesitated before finalizing deals, the way political commentators on open feeds kept circling the phrase, "protocol begins," without context. People felt the tremor before the earthquake, and fear had a language of its own. Meanwhile, in his private quarters high above the council dome, Marcus Hale replayed the incident log once more. He did not trust summaries, not when the raw feed was available. Every time he watched the vessel glide through the exclusion ring, the same thought needled him. Ships did not simply appear like that. Even cloaked vessels left faint trails if you knew where to look. But this one gave him nothing, like it had not traveled through space at all, but had folded space itself until the gap was meaningless. He shut the display down and leaned back, the faint tremor in his hand returning despite his will. The Directorate had catalogued humanity for centuries as unrefined, unpredictable, biologically redundant, and strategically irrelevant. A species to watch from afar but never engage. A Tier 3 cluster that should never have crossed the line into higher relevance. And yet they had. The knock at his door interrupted the spiral. Celine Ward entered without waiting for permission, a datapad tucked under her arm. She looked more composed than he felt, though he knew better than to assume calm meant confidence. "You've seen the chatter," she said without preamble. "Yes. And you've realized what the chatter doesn't say." Hale narrowed his eyes. "Go on." Ward set the datapad down between them. No reports of a heat signature. No reports of a launch countdown. No chatter from their own systems. If humanity wanted this to be hidden, we wouldn't be talking about it. Which means they wanted us to see it. Hale allowed himself a dry chuckle, though it held no mirth. "We've said that already." "Not like this," Ward countered. "We thought the message was in the math." It wasn't. The message was in the silence around it. They are forcing us to admit we don't know the rules of the game. The two of them sat in silence for a long moment, the city's neon haze bleeding in through the tinted walls. Finally, Hale spoke. "The Council will divide on this. Some will demand eradication before humanity grows teeth. Others will insist on restraint. Either way, the choice is no longer ours alone." Ward gave a short nod, her lips pressed thin. "And that is what keeps me awake. Not that they came, but that they chose the moment. We are reacting to their timing, not ours." When she left, Hale remained seated, staring into the darkened room. The thought came back, unshakable and cold. This was not war. Not yet. But neither was it diplomacy. It was something worse. It was humanity deciding to be noticed. The order moved faster than rumor, faster than speculation, faster than anyone expected. By the time dawn rolled across Carthos Prime, encrypted streams were already crackling with a single, unmistakable phrase, "Black Signal, Tier Omega." In command barracks, junior officers stared at the directive in disbelief. Some had never even seen the code outside of training simulations, and more than one whispered the obvious: this was overreaction, someone at the top had lost their mind. But others remembered their history lessons too well. Omega was not a warning, not a bluff. Omega was a line in the sand drawn only when empires had already begun to collapse. The fleet marshals reacted with their usual blend of arrogance and unease. Meetings were called in darkened halls, holographic tables flickering with strategic overlays, while old rivalries boiled just beneath the surface. Some saw the breach as a chance to prove superiority. Others whispered about caution, about not playing into the hands of a species that seemed to understand theater better than war. None could agree. And while they argued, the black vessel vanished. Not with a jump signature. Not with the distortion of a fold drive. Not even with the faint rippling of energy decay that followed cloaked ships. One moment it was there, an absence shaped like a craft, and the next it simply wasn't. The exclusion ring went quiet again, as if nothing had ever disturbed it. For most, the disappearance was a relief. For Hale, it was worse than the arrival. Ships did not just cease. They went somewhere, and knowing they had no way of tracking where meant the Directorate was blind in a way it had not been in millennia. At a hastily convened security briefing, Hale stood before the gathered officers, his posture rigid but his voice unnervingly calm. The recordings of the vessel hovered over the table, replaying endlessly, and every set of eyes in the room followed the void shape as if it might reveal a secret they had missed. "You've all seen the data," Hale began. "You've read the transcripts. You understand what it implies. This was not an accident. It was not a misfire. It was not a probe gone astray. It was intent." General Adrian Cross leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "Intent to do what, exactly?" Because so far all they've done is walk into our house, rearrange the furniture, and vanish. A few of the younger officers chuckled, but Hale's expression stayed flat. That's exactly the problem. They didn't need to take anything, or destroy anything. They left us with silence, and silence is the loudest message of all. Counselor Celine Ward sat near the end of the table, her eyes sharp as blades. Silence can be broken. We just have to decide whether we break it with diplomacy, or fire. Fire, one of the marshals said immediately. His voice was full of the same certainty that had carried the Directorate through a dozen border wars. If humanity has learned to mimic Tier 7 navigation, we cannot risk giving them time to mature. They must be crushed before they grow teeth. Dr. Lydia Monroe's voice cut through the room like a scalpel. They already have teeth. You're just noticing the bite marks now. That silenced the marshal faster than any reprimand. Cross exhaled, shaking his head. All of this is speculation. We don't know what they want, or even if they'll return. For all we know, that ship was a one-time anomaly. A flare before extinction. Ward looked at him with something that was not quite pity. And for all we know, it was their opening act. The words lingered, chilling and undeniable. Hale did not join the argument. He simply keyed in his authorization code once more, transmitting the Omega directive to Fleet Command with finality. "Prepare the intercept wings," he said, his voice as steady as stone. "We will not wait to be surprised again." The officers exchanged uneasy glances, but none dared to contradict him outright. Outside, beyond the shielded walls of the chamber, the galaxy continued on as if nothing had changed. Trade routes still pulsed with traffic. Civilian feeds still chattered with gossip and politics. Markets still opened at dawn. But beneath it all, in the coded channels of the Directorate and the whispers of those who knew better, one truth had already taken root. The era of distant observation was over. Humanity had decided to be seen. And the Directorate, whether it admitted it or not, had already stepped into a conflict it did not understand.